All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here on gardening in the Panhandle. Is our webinar started?
I don't believe so. We got no attendees in there quite yet.
Julie says I can start, but we're going to wait just a second. There we go.
There we are.
Yeah, let some people filter in for a second and then we'll get started. Nothing like a little rust after the holidays. So we're happy to have everybody here with us for our first Gardening in the Panhandle live after the holiday. We're going to let everybody filter in for just a couple more seconds, and then we'll get started.
Should we have people put where they're coming from in the chat?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We got 70 people on here.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, we know we had a number of people register from Florida and across the deep South. So if you don't mind in the chat, just put where you're from, county and state, city, whatever you want to do.
I see Panama City, Pensacola, Okaloosa. There were some Tallahassee folks.
Awesome.
Gulf Breeze. The Arctic of Florida.
Sure felt like it a couple weeks ago.
There's been those memes, like everyone in Florida this weekend, and we're like in our parkas and stuff, because it's down to the 50s.
It's great to see all our Western Panhandle friends over there in Pensacola and Gulf Breeze, Navarre. Oh, hello, Apalachicola. Good deal. Yeah, I saw over in Apalachicola that freeze knocked back some of the mangroves that had moved up our way a little bit. So that was interesting. They liked it up here until it got below 20. So. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We decided to do a special episode on freeze damaged landscapes here at Gardening in the Panhandle Live for our first episode of 2023. The reason being, as you know, we had a major freeze event. Kind of historically cold weather for the time of the year that it occurred in late December here. We got, depending on where you were, middle teens, generally 14, 15, 16, wind chills in the single digits in a lot of places. So obviously a lot of major damage in the landscape. And so we got a panelist hopping on here, it looks like, but I'm going to ask everybody, Beth and Mark, to go ahead and introduce themselves for 2023. You're the same people you were last year, but just give us a New Year greeting. Beth, we'll start with you.
All right, glad to be here. I'm Beth Bowles, a horticulture agent out here in the Pensacola area.
Awesome. Generally one of the colder areas of the Panhandle for some reason. Mark.
Yes, Mark Tanzig, Leon County horticulture agent, and glad to be here.
Awesome. And we've got Sheila Dunning. I don't know if Sheila has her camera on. If she does, she can hop on here with the camera. Give her a second. All right. So got a good team behind the scenes. Got Beth and Mark here on the panel. And of course, my name is Daniel Leonard. I'm the county extension agent here in Calhoun County, Florida, right in the middle of the Panhandle in scenic Bluntstown. So we're going to go ahead and get started with some citrus. I'm going to toss that to start with to Mark. Mark, give us a little bit of background on how the citrus crop's looking.
Pretty terrible. So there's been a push for cold hardy citrus, and there are citrus varieties that can handle that cold a little better than some of the citrus that grow further south. But even our cold hardy citrus, so at least the ones I've seen around Tallahassee, they all look pretty terrible. Even the ones in my backyard. I have a grapefruit tree that I'm not sure is going to pull through. So you're going to hear this a lot today in this short session. But basically, we don't want you to do anything right now. I want you to just hold on and wait for some regrowth. And with citrus, that might not be till late spring, early summer. And then you can kind of assess and see how bad that damage is and start pruning up to kind of, try to get it back into shape and into some production. It's a good chance we're probably not going to have much fruit this year on a lot of our citrus trees, unfortunately. And in addition to waiting and holding back on pruning, also remember that because the tree is really stressed out, doesn't have a lot of leaves, don't try to water it or fertilize it back into health. Just leave it alone for a little while. And once it starts to flush out some new growth, late spring, summer, and you kind of prune off that dead wood, then maybe start, with a smaller dose of fertilizer. It's not as big as it used to be, so you don't need that full kind of application of fertilizer. So just be careful, and again, you're gonna hear it a lot, just take it easy, put the clippers down and just wait for some growth once we warm up.
Great answer. Thanks, Mark. I do have a question. We have Danielle Williams, our formerly Danielle Sprague. If you saw her in 2022, she got married end of the year. So congratulations,
Congrats.
Danielle. She's going to be managing the chat for us. And of course, she is our regional citrus agent here in the Panhandle. So if you do have any specific citrus questions that we don't hit on, ask them in the chat. Danielle can get to that. She's a little under the weather, so not appearing in person today, but she is managing the chat. So I do, the citrus trees that we grow do have varying levels of hardiness. So, like we've got kumquats and satsumas that are considered pretty hardy. And Beth, you might want to chime on this as well. As far as those more hardy varieties go, we're still seeing a pretty good bit of damage. So even on those, are you foreseeing some dieback this spring?
Yeah, I think we will. Even a mature tree, a satsuma, which is really one of our most cold hardy, is dropping all of its leaves. The very tips may have some dieback on them. So even your kumquat, we had one in the garden that it was a smaller plant. It is seriously injured. We still see green stems, but the leaves look terrible. The tips look bad. So we will have to wait and see exactly where that growth resumes before we do our pruning.
Yeah, one thing to add to that, when you see that new growth, the one thing to pay close attention to is, any growth below that graft line, make sure you're pruning that off. So, you're going to wait a little bit. The graft line, you can tell at the base of your tree, there'll be a little bit of a bulge, I guess, where it's connected to the scion, to the rootstock. And you want to make sure that anything that's sprouting below that graft line, you take out of there, because otherwise you're going to get, sour orange. You're going to get something that you don't really want.
And so, in the unfortunate scenario where we only have growth below that graft,
it's done.
It's done. All right, good enough. So we did have one question in there. Danielle hit it in the chat, but we'll just hit it real quick. I have a lot of people asking, what about all this cold damaged fruit and cold damaged leaves that have just fallen to the ground? Leave them, rake them up. Does it make a difference?
Yeah, we really want to remove a lot of that. Think about all this fruit on the ground. It's going to be rotting. We're going to attract pests in. So it's best as much as you can to remove it. I had a gentleman call me who has, thousands of fruit. And he's like, I'm getting tired. I said, it's up to you. You may not get them all, but go ahead and try to get as much of that leaves and debris up, send it to the recycle and compost, and you'll be good.
All right, great. So, we covered citrus fairly quickly. I know a lot of you had questions about that. Hopefully we got to that. If not, again, go ahead and put it in the chat. We're going to move on to the next most asked about group of plants, and we're going to talk palms. And so Beth, we're going to start with Beth here on this. And the first plant I want to ask you, or Beth, maybe just generally talk about kind of some of the damage you're seeing with palms, and then we'll get into some of the specific palms that folks asked about.
All right, so it all depends on the type of palm. So remember, we've been kind of warm for many, many years, and people have kind of moved a lot of palms up to our area that are not necessarily for our hardiness zone. So it all depends on which palm. But for the most part, our established palms, our canary, our sable, really not sable, you don't see too much, but the Canary Islands in that group, we're seeing some brown fronds. And that's the good thing, that just kind of the outer fronds look like they're damaged now. We don't actually know, though, if that damage went down into that center leaf or into the bud. And that's why we're going to have to wait. Now, some of our palms, like Windmill and Pendo, a lot of those, if they were mature, they look just fine with maybe just the slightest bit of injury to them, but they're pretty good. So it all depends on the type of palm.
Fortunately, we were, cold and dry, and it seems like palms do a little bit better when we're cold and dry than when we're cold and wet or have ice or things like that. So that's good. But Beth, maybe let's talk about a couple of plants that aren't really palms here to start with. So I've had a lot of questions. Folks still have a lot of sagos in the landscape, and they're saying, my sago is totally brown. What's going to go on with that here in the spring, and what can we do about it?
So sago is, we call it a palm, but it is a cycad. So we have several cycads we grow here. We grow the sago, we grow the coontie, and the cardboard palm. But with the sago, those leaves are going to brown with a freeze like we had. And if they're totally brown, you can remove them and then wait for new growth to resume. But if they're kind of brown and kind of green, we actually want to leave that on the plant, even though it's hard for you to look at, because that green is still making food for the plant. It still has stored food, and that's going to help the plant regrow as we get to spring. So totally brown, go ahead and cut off very carefully. You know, sagos really are prickly, so wear your gloves, wear your eye protection, and you can dispose of those if it's totally brown, but go ahead and wait if it's part of the way.
And the last question I have on palms, let's cover a couple of those more tropical palms. You know, we have an awful lot of folks, like you said, that moved up things like Bismarck palm. They moved to a lot of the Washingtonias, the fan palms. You know, we've even seen some queen palms up here in the move into the Panhandle. And so what, in your opinion, and even Robelinis, you know, pygmy dates, what are your opinion on those?
So we'll start with the Washingtonia. Washingtonia will definitely have some frond damage. Hopefully we'll still have the center leaf and the bud alive on those. It all depends though on specific location along the Panhandle, if you were in a colder spot or held cold longer. And so with those palms, it's a wait and see what happens. Like with your sago, if it's completely brown, you could remove it. But if there's any green in that frond, leave it until we see new growth recover on that palm. The downside with some of those palms is if we go through a wet spring, that water can collect in the bud area and cause that base of that leaf, if it were cold damaged, what we call the spear leaf, to begin to decay. And if that decay gets into the actual bud of the palm, we can actually see death later on. So unfortunately, we don't know what's going to happen with every single palm. With something like the Robelini or the pygmy date palm, unfortunately, most of you have lost that palm. It is
Those
not
truly
for our
tropical
area.
palms.
It's
Yeah.
a tropical palm. It's really beautiful, and we like that smaller palm, but it grows south of where we live for most of us. So the amount of cold we have, I would likely say that one is a goner. The bud is dead. And then what was the other one, Daniel?
Queen.
Queen, you know, queens are relative in the palm world were relatively inexpensive. Your nursery personnel will tell you you're going to replace it every few years. So a queen is not going to make it through a cold like we had for most people.
And you did mention it earlier, but we have a couple of questions in the chat. Just maybe touch on some of the more hardy Phoenix palms like the Sylvester and the Canary Island and things like that, just once over.
Right, so you're more hardy of those, of the date palms. You will see some fronds that are browning. And you remember, if they're completely brown and you can get to them, remove them. If they still have part of the brown and then green, leave them until new growth returns. The key is we're all just still going to have to wait, because I can't say someone won't ever lose a date palm if that spear leaf lower was damaged by the cold and that extends down into the bud. It's just always iffy. But usually those are they're kind of intermediate. You know, they can be damaged, but you may think, oh, it's going to recover, and then summer hits and then it collapses. And that's because a secondary organism sometimes gets into that bud if it's weakened by this cold and causes a collapse later in the summer. So we just need to be patient with palms. Don't rush to do any heavy pruning and get rid of everything, and wait and see what happens.
Good deal. Good advice. So next question, we do have a couple of folks that asked about turf grass. We don't think about this a lot, but Beth and Mark, was there any concern with turf grass? Generally, most of the time they're already dormant. So what are y'all's thoughts?
I'm not worried about it.
Well, you're never worried about turf grass.
No, I mean, yeah, they're warm season turf grasses that we know that they do go dormant in the winter anyway. And a lot of them we had that cold snap in October. So I think when that happened, a lot of the grasses had started to go dormant. So, but as I mentioned with the citrus, though, remember when things are dormant, like your lawn, just, no water, you don't need to water, don't need to fertilize, just, wait for that green growth later in the spring and, then start doing your normal turf maintenance.
And we think about St. Augustine as a little bit more tropical. Is there any concern with St. Augustine?
Yeah, I would say St. Augustine would be the one that could be affected more than any, because its runners are on the, above the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Your zoysia, Bermuda are going to be perfectly fine. They will regrow. Centipede should be okay. But the big issue with people's turf is if it was stressed last season, if it had disease, it wasn't as healthy going into this, that may be where when you come to get to spring, you find patches that don't regrow. It's usually another factor in addition to the cold that kind of wipes it out. So we still will have some lawn problems for people come in spring, not necessarily just from cold temperatures, but because we had disease or insects or a weakened turf from overwatering, over fertilization that weakened it going into the cold.
All right, good deal. So essentially, don't do a whole lot to your turf grass just yet. We hate to say wait and see, leave it alone, and it's really tempting to get out there and do stuff right now, but really patience and a lot of this stuff is going to be key here for the next couple of months.
Yeah, and we have more cold weather coming, so we're really not done with all this yet.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so we had a question in the chat on dollarweed, and I'll get that. Yeah, unfortunately, probably not cold enough to kill the dollarweed.
Have you noticed the
to kill your
Betony?
St. Augustine?
Yeah, the Betony's loving this weather. That's the greenest thing in the yard right now.
Mark, let's talk some hardy shrubs, some natives. So let's go. I'm going to group a couple of these together for you. What do you think? We had a lot of these things because we were so warm going into Christmas that still had, green foliage on them. And of course, it looks very dramatic when it gets burned off. But things like, azalea, hydrangea, even crepe myrtle, that kind of thing. Are we concerned with any of that?
A lot of this goes back to Florida friendly principle number 1, which is right plant, right place, right? So if we were growing plants that are for our zone, we really don't have to worry, right? And a lot of the stress goes away. So a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the comments that we saw people sign up for, I just saw bird of paradise, bottle brush, Christmas cactus. These are all tropical plants. They are not going to make it. Or if they do, they're not going to look great for a while. So the azaleas, I've seen azaleas that if someone had cut them late and they got a little bit of flush of growth late in the season, those got a little bit burned. But in general, I think the plant's going to be fine. Actually, mine is already starting to bloom in parts of the yard where I have blooms down at the lower part of the bush. I know the camellias dropped a lot of their flowers. Unfortunately, there was a big camellia show this weekend in Tallahassee. They had to kind of adjust it and make it a non-judging event because so many of the blooms were destroyed.
That's unfortunate.
Hydrangeas, again, someone was asking about hydrangeas. They will be fine. With a lot of these, you're just going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait and see what new growth we get and, then prune accordingly. Once you start to see that new growth in the spring, the important thing, the reason we're telling you to leave all this brown material there is that it actually insulates the rest of those growing points on the plant as we get these follow-up little colds bursts, right? So I think we're getting the 30 this weekend. We could potentially still have some colder weather coming in all the way till late March even. So those dead fronds, those dead stems, leaves, they're actually going to help protect some of those growing points, which that's what you really want to protect.
Exactly. I do have a couple of shrubs that let's touch on that, man, they just look really bad. And typically when we're talking about these are going to be our evergreen shrubs or we're pushing the zone as it is. So the first one I want to talk about is oleander. So maybe Beth, could you touch on oleander for a second?
Yeah, oleander is definitely going to be hurt with the kind of cold we had. So if that is completely brown and you want to get a little bit of it out of the way, you could prune it back by half. But like Mark just said, if you kind of leave some of that lower half of the plant, you can insulate that if we get another cold in case growth restarts. And then you can see where the growth is going to happen. So, if you can't just wait until spring for the whole plant, at least a little bit of it gone just to get some of the site out of your way. But that insulating of leaving a foot or 2 or a foot or 3, it helps that plant. And then you'll see where the growth happens.
Good deal. Mark, the last one, I'll toss this to you as far as shrubs go. So gardenia is another one, they don't tend to mind the cold too bad, but I have seen some that with burned leaves.
Yeah, gardenias, and those are, so like oleander, that's zone 9 to 11. Pop quiz, everyone there. Put in the chat, what zone are we in up here in the Panhandle? We'll put the zone because oleander is zone 9, and that gives you a little clue. We're not zone 9. You asked about gardenias. Gardenias are hardiness zone 8. There's even actually some cold hardy. Oh, good job. Some of them, yeah, good job.
Yeah.
So there's some newer gardenias that I saw are rated to zone 7. We're zone 8 here in the Panhandle. I did also see where some varieties are grafted gardenias And the root stock for that one is not hardy down below 28. So it's going to depend on the particular variety and even the way that it was produced and propagated. But for the most part, gardenias will be okay. Mine are fine. Now, I did buy one for the mother-in-law for Christmas and had it in a pot out in the garage until we got it to her, or in the driveway, and that one's not looking so good. I'm gonna have to go get her a new replacement because, remember, if you have plants in containers, those plants experience a little bit more cold as that cold kind of permeates through the soil in the container. So that one I'm gonna have to replace. But for the most part, the gardenia should be okay. Again, you might have some dieback, leave it alone, let it grow back, just clean up once you start to get some growth.
Awesome. So we're going to keep moving right along to a little bit different category. Again, we'll continue to answer as many questions as we can get in the chat as well. But a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing, we're actually going to get to hopefully here in just a second. So the next one we're going to talk about, I'm going to throw it to Beth. Beth, could you talk about some of the tropical fruits that that folks had out there, like avocado? We saw a lot of that moving up into the Panhandle, bananas, and even stuff like pineapple, that maybe they left outside.
There's not much hope, I don't think, unless you were really protected. Bananas will be all the way to the ground this year. Lots of debris there. It's going to be wet and mushy. So if you want to get some of that wet and mushy stuff out of the way and leave a little bit of the base, you're fine to do that. Avocado, I don't think most avocados are going to make the kind of cold we had down below 20. We lost quite a few tropical fruit that we just grow for fun out here. And pineapple, one of our bromeliads, we lost a lot of bromeliads. Not many bromeliads that were left outside are going to be alive unless you had it really banked up well. There may be something at the base that's alive or is in a big container with a huge plant. Maybe some of the center of that is alive. But yeah, some of that really, the kind of coal we had, that needed to be moved inside.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just want to, kind of drive the point home that all of this, the stuff that's native to here, and even the things that tend to grow a little bit north of us, like what I'm about to cover, deciduous fruit, it's going to be just fine. In fact, that cold weather was actually really good for it. It allowed a lot of chill hours to accumulate. And so you may even notice a better year next year than you have had in some time with plants like peaches, plums, if you had anything like that, pears even, some cases, blueberries are going to be fine. I saw some in the chat, some raspberries and blackberries. Those are even more northern species than we typically grow here. So they're going to be just fine and even enjoy the cold. So do y'all have anything to add on those deciduous fruits other than, just let them hang out, accumulate some more chill hours, and get ready to pick some berries next year?
Yeah, I mean, I actually waited till after the cold snap to then go prune them, because right now I know for sure they're dormant. And so everything else will tell you, leave it alone, wait till the growth. But those hardy deciduous trees, my muscadines, I'm out there now trying to get them pruned back and just like regular winter maintenance with them.
Yeah, for sure. So deciduous plants like that, native plants to Florida, plants from the north of here, they're in good shape. What we're really worried about are these things that we've been trying to push the boundaries of.
Right.
So Beth, speaking of pushing the boundaries, let's talk about some tropical type bulbs. Mark, could you hit a couple of these pruning questions on those fruit trees for us while Beth and I continue on to the bulbs? Thanks, Mark. All right, so Beth, let's talk about some bulbs. We've got a number of things, that are sort of hardy here, sort of not. So the first thing I want to talk about, lots of the lily type plants. We think of those trumpet shaped flowers, things like agapanthus, amaryllis, crinum, irises, daylilies. Just kind of talk about some of those for a few minutes.
So in that mix, what we call bulb plants, we actually have true bulbs, which would be like your lily, your true lily, your Easter lilies and things. Those will return. Underneath all this growth, the growth that died, there's a structure that's pretty well adapted and will make it back under most circumstances. Now we have stuff like gingers that are rhizomes. For the most part, we're going to have a lot of gingers return as well. The only reason they might not is if we get wet and some of those bulbs and rhizomes decay or get too moist and rot out, then you could have a little patchy regrowth in that area. The peacock ginger, it's one of the latest to returns anyway. So be careful with that one. You'll think, oh, it's dead, and it won't be back until well into May. So your other gingers have returned. You're still waiting on something like peacock. Daylilies, very hardy. Our tuberous roots, they're already up. Some of them never were really affected that much. So you see green growth on those already. So most of your daylilies will be fine. Agapanthus, crinums look horrid. So they have so much mushy growth that's wet. Mark was talking about this before we began, and you do need to clean a little of that mushy growth off there. You don't want that to kind of hold moisture against the base of the plant. So some of that mushy stuff, just get you a pair of gloves on, make a clean cut with a little bit above the ground level and get some of that mushy tissue of philodendrons, agapanthus, crinums out of there. You can add a little mulch on top if you want, but they're still alive underneath. They're still green to that root system and that bulb system. So those should recover. Sometimes they may be a little bit delayed or not get as big. They've got to come back. But yeah, we'll see those again in the garden.
One more. Did you mention African iris?
Oh, African iris should be pretty hardy for most people to come back. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know that those frond, I mean, not the fronds, the leaves, kind of sword shaped leaves look awful right now, but you're saying just cut them back and you'll be good to go.
And that's such, for most of us, it's a big clumping plant. So underneath all there, we'll still have some live tissue.
For sure. There you go. Thanks, Beth. Let's talk about one or two a little bit more tropical things. I've got some elephant ears in my yard, and of course they died all the way back to the ground. Did it get cold enough to damage those tubers on the elephant ear?
I'm going to guess no.
I hope it did, but I don't think it did. So.
Yeah, well, just with my, our experience with colocasia, which is taro, which is, a close relative, a lot of the ornamental elephant ears, those always come back. So, they'll be fine.
Okay.
I think they'll come back.
I looked at our black magic a few days ago, and there's little color underneath the ground, so you can't see any of the plant at all. I mean, I don't know, it blew away somewhere. It died and blew away, but underneath there's some color, and it will regrow.
All right, cool.
Folks mentioned princess flower, which I'm pretty sure that's Tipicina. Folks asked about bougainvillea, Thai plant, Norfolk Island pine, bird of paradise I saw on there. These are all tropicals. We're talking zone 9, zone 10, and they can't handle that cold. So, if you're sad about it, I'm sorry, but it is too cold for them. And when you want to replant something back and you don't like the stress of the death and the having to replant, just make sure you're picking a plant that's for your zone, and you don't have to worry about all this.
Yeah, or grow it in a pot and bring it indoors.
Yeah,
not in the garage, in climate controlled inside. Yep. So while we're on those tropicals, let's continue on that. We had a number. I mean, like a lot of people ask about philodendron. The various species, the monstera, all the different kinds of philodendron that's out there. And Beth, we were talking about this before we got on, so I think you've got a pretty good perspective on it. What do you think? Philodendron, did it survive?
Yeah, it likely did for a lot of people. So when we say it likely did, remember there can always be someone in the icebox of Florida and Crestview it didn't. So somebody's philodendron may have died, but for most of us, the top part has just turned to liquid and mushy plants. Underneath that, underground, there's still a growing system that will return. So go ahead, when you're dealing with a mushy plant that's going to be moist around any of the base of the plant, you may want to remove some of that. So with philodendron, wear your gloves, clean up that mushy stuff, and you can go ahead and get that out of there. But if they're dry stems, those are the ones you can leave and let protect the lower part of the plant. So once you get that philodendron out of there and the mush is gone, just kind of get a little mulch or straw and lightly put over it for our next cold.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. So while we're on some of the tropical stuff, what do you think about hibiscus?
Well, there's a lot of hibiscus. So that's
let's start with the tropical hibiscus.
Tropical, maybe not. For some people, tropical this is going to be the last year and they'll have to start over. It all depends if it were really protected against your house, how it was located, all that sort of thing. But there are many hardy hibiscus out there. I love swamp hibiscus. It'll be back. Our other hardy
Rosa Sharon, which
Rosa
hibiscus
Sharon,
relative.
that doesn't mind. That grows up north of where we are, the Althea.
Confederate
so there are
rose
lots of hibiscus. Yeah. I'm sorry, what, Daniel?
Confederate rose should be fine.
Yeah.
All those hardy ones. So there you go. I promise we're getting to those grassy type plants. Let's in fact, let's go ahead and do that. So when we were touching on those bulbs, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of the things that are being asked. And the first one that I've seen several times is variegated flax lily, which just looks awful in the landscape right now. So Mark, see you nodding your head, so you're volunteering. What do you say about flax lily? Did it, number one, did it survive, and number two, post freeze care?
I was agreeing with you. They look terrible.
Awful.
As far, I'm pretty sure flax lily will be okay. I mean, I might need Beth's help here, but I think flax lily is going to come back fine. It's just going to look pretty ratty for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of those type of plants that have that rhizomatous bulbous type system under the ground going to be just fine. They look fine, but they've got a massive amount of energy, stored underneath the surface of the soil, and they should be good.
And that soil, the soil keeps them a little warmer, right? So they weren't exposed to as a cold of a temperature. Yeah.
Right.
Plumbago is another one. I know we were on grassy ones, but I know a lot of people asked about plumbago. Also looks absolutely terrible.
Real bad.
Pretty sure that one will come back though. That one will be back. But again, try to leave as much of that dead stuff there for now, so it can protect that young growth coming up at the base.
Yeah, I mean, our panelists here have done a great job talking about it, but just to drive to the point home one more time, if your plant has that mushy type dead foliage, it's turned to mush, Agapanthus, elephant ear, that kind of stuff's okay to go ahead and cut that off. It's even good for the plant. If it was a more woody plant, like Mark just mentioned with plumbago, leave it. Let it come back from the base of the ground. Let that green tissue come back up in the spring. Then you can see where it's coming back from and where you need to cut it back to. Until then, leave it alone. So other ornamental grass, Beth, we've talked about, or we've seen fountain grass, different things like that, miscanthus. I know that the fountain grass is a little more tropical. What do you think about that?
Yeah, purple fountain is a tropical plant for us. We usually consider it an annual in most areas. So it's likely gone, that they will need to replant a new purple fountain. But the other pennisedums, the other fountain grasses, are very cold hardy. And the miscanthus, the silver feather grasses, are very cold hardy. They're fine, even though they do this every year. And you just wait in the spring for the new growth to start. Then you cut them back, and you'll have within a week, you'll have growth that comes up. So grasses recover very well if they're suited for our area.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think if nothing else, one thing that this winter has taught us, this has been an aberration for us lately, but historically semi-normal. One thing it's taught us is to really pay attention, like Mark mentioned, to our Florida friendly zones, our hardiness zones, zone 8, grow things that grow well here, stick to natives as much as possible. And again, if it's not a native, make sure it's a more exotic that can truly handle our historical temperatures, because even though that may not be the norm going forward, it'll still happen here from time to time like it did this winter. So
and even with one thing with natives, just remember that there's, Florida is a very long state, and we have lots of growing zones. So firebush, for instance, is a native plant, but it's native to South Florida. So when you grow a native, South Florida plant in North Florida, they still get zapped. I mean, most likely our firebush is going to be fine and come back, but it's native to, our general area is, those plants are used to this. They're going to be just fine.
North Florida native. There you go.
That's right.
Beth, we had a number of people asking about ferns. And so there's really only 3 that were asked about. We had staghorn, the really popular, porch plant, like the macho types, and then some more Boston type ferns. Could you touch on the 3 of those ferns that lots of folks had growing outdoors?
Yeah, for most of you, you needed to move that staghorn inside.
Mine
I
didn't
left
get
mine outside. That's hard to do. But I left mine outside, and it was small, but I covered it completely with big layers of mulch and straw to try to insulate it. I can maybe see where it has possible potential to come back, just because it was like it was underground. But if it was left exposed to the air, unless it was super big and there's like a little bit of live back in there somewhere, a lot of staghorns wouldn't make it through this kind of cold. So again, you're going to have to see if there's regrowth. For Boston, don't worry if it's in the ground, it'll be back. Definitely. Looks bad. Same with macho. If it was in the ground, likely it will return, because ferns have an underground running stem that's very cold hardy. However, if it was in a container and that cold air moved through the entire container, that may be gone. So if you want to check now, you can slide them out of the container. You're going to look for brown roots that would be dead, and you may pull those apart looking for any kind of white root system or, any more sturdy roots. and then put that in a new pot if that was your concern with your Boston or your macho fern. Now, other
Awesome.
ferns, there's netted chain fern, there's cinnamon fern, they'll return. They go through this all the time.
Awesome.
Yeah, my staghorn stayed outside. It was a real big one. My mother-in-law gave me.
What's
But
the
it does
verdict?
have one little green frond popping out the south part of the plant. So I'm hopeful it's going to make it.
There you go. Mark, while we got you here, let's talk about a couple of those perennials that are, that are growing up here that are really a little bit more South Central Florida plants. So let's think about things like Duranta, golden dewdrops, the Mexican firecracker, like the Roselia, even Mexican petunia. What do you think about those three?
Just like all I've been saying, those are more little bit, where they're a little bit more north than they'd like. And so there's a chance most of those will come back. I'm pretty sure the Mexican petunia, by the way, is an invasive species. So we're going to, hopefully those did die. If you have one of the sterile varieties, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to really get them. I think they're going to, again, come back from the base. It's going to be a lot like now your Duranta, we have some here. They look terrible, but it's going to be another wait and see. We're going to just let that dead stuff stay for a while, and we're going to see what happens in the spring.
And we have a question here. The yellow lantana, a lot of lantanas are growing, that new gold, and those types are super common. Beth, we see those stems splitting and things like that. Do you think those are coming back?
Well, a splitting stem is not a good sign. That usually means that particular stem is dead. But on lantana, there could still be growing points below that. So you may wait and see on that one to see if you get regrowth below the split stem, or investigate a little bit further. But it's not going to return from it where a stem has already split or kind of the bark is broken open.
Gotcha. We are almost done here, folks. We're going to touch on a few more before we try to get out of here at 1, respect everybody's lunch hour, their time here. Mark, let's hit a couple of these more true tropicals. I know what your answer is most likely going to be, but the people ask and I give the people what they want to hear. So
What you got, Daniel?
The first one, we're going to go kind of rapid fire. Bougainvillea.
Nope. Toast, probably.
All right. No. Hawaiian Thai.
Hawaiian Thai, yeah, I'm not feeling good about it, but
all right,
maybe.
Yeah, you got a iffy there. Norfolk Island pine.
No.
Okay. Bird of paradise.
Goodbye.
Plumeria.
Done. Plumeria for sure. Done.
Ficus.
Most likely. Oh, I don't know, Beth. What you got on ficus?
Well, Ficus pumila, the creeping fig, probably has some live growth somewhere under there, but it's going to look terrible on the outside.
Yeah, they were trying to go like
if it's a houseplant ficus, I don't think so.
Hopefully it was stayed inside.
Yep.
They're asking here, I'm going to interrupt because century plant the cacti came up. Those Christmas cactus, no, those should have been inside. Those are going to be toast. Century plant would get burned. A little bit, but it's probably going to be fine. Your century plant, again, just kind of follow the same cleanup. If it's mush, you can take it off, but otherwise you want to leave some there to protect the growing points.
Nice. Thanks for that lightning round, Mark. Hit a lot of the tropicals. If y'all do have any more tropicals you'd like to know about, if you'd like to hear Mark tell you it's dead, just ask ask it in the chat there. And we're going to move on to some other stuff. Beth, awful lot of folks had a lot of winter annual color out in the landscape. What about those?
We don't have much color anymore. If you
snapdragons, pansies, violas, petunias, things like that.
Yeah, so anything in flower, the flower definitely is gone, and the plants, even the leaves, are very stressed. So what you can do, get in there and kind of do a little maintenance on those, get rid of some of that dead material, and then put a good fresh layer of mulch around them to protect them. And you should have a little regrowth since our weather's still cool. The edible garden, a lot of the edible vegetables took a huge hit, and we actually had to pull them out and kind of start over. Kale did great. So plant more kale.
Yeah. Spinach did fine. Some of the lettuce varieties was weird. Some went to mush, some did fine.
I had a huge bed of mixed bed of violas and ornamental kale. The violas got hit pretty good, but the kale looks like nothing happened. It looks great. So there you go. And finally, Beth, before we get out of here, let's look at some herbs. Herbs have gotten really popular. Aloe's kind of an herb, so let's talk about that first.
Yeah, aloe is really, it gets hit every winter when we get a cold, and likely will return for a lot of people. In some areas, it's not going to, just because 20 degrees is quite a bit.
Yeah.
But some other herbs we always lose some of our warm season herbs, even lemongrass, lemon balm, those go every year. If it's a big plant like lemongrass, there's still some life in the center and underground. We'll just wait to cut all that leaf tissue back, like our ornamental grasses, once we see regrowth occur.
Yep. And the last one I want to talk about, Beth, is woody herb that doesn't mind the cold generally, but that's rosemary.
Yeah, rosemary's still doing okay. It will survive the cold just fine. There may be a little bit here and there if it had some young tender growth on it that had come out, in late fall. But otherwise, rosemary handles our cold really well.
And
Yeah,
Mark, there's a native rosemary, right?
There is the native. Well, there's it's called Florida rosemary, not a true rosemary. That one's a Central Florida one. That I don't know if anyone's growing that ornamentally, but we had a rose.
Yeah.
You are? Oh yeah.
My Conradina did just fine.
Oh, Conradina, gotcha. That's a native, right? So that one's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Our culinary rosemary, we had one in a raised bed, and just like in a container, I think it experienced a little more cold and it looks a little rough. But there was one more thing I thought of before I know we got to go here soon, but the constant hedging of some plants, right? So I think I saw some Asiatic jasmine that had constantly been hedged. So remember that new growth is very susceptible to cold damage. So if you're constantly out there, your landscape crew is constantly out there nipping and pruning and squaring things off, those plants probably experience more damage than ones next door that hadn't been pruned so often. So just remember to, once we get into the cold season, you want to kind of, for most of your plants, you want to lay back on pruning, because once you prune, new growth comes up, and that growth is what's going to get hit the hardest.
Yeah. And so Beth, that's an excellent point to leave us with, Mark. Beth, you got a closing statement for us regarding recovering from this cold weather we had this winter?
Hey, enjoy more of winter. We don't need to jump into gardening right just yet. So we'll have plenty of that time for that in spring and summer.
Yeah. And, I was down in around Gainesville in the Waukesasa Bay area fishing with my brother. And, there was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dead snook, snook's a tropical fish, not supposed to be that far north. And like the snook, as if we have a couple more cold winters, guarantee you, we'll see these plants start creeping back up, people trying to grow them again, and we'll get burned again one day. So my closing statement, like we mentioned earlier, would just be to really, if you can, as much as possible, stick with plants that are native to the Florida Panhandle, and exotics that are truly able to handle our zone 8B, 8, even in some cases down along the coast 9. But just know that these really cold snaps are historically fairly normal for us, even though they're kind of abnormal in the last couple of decades. So it can happen, and it probably will happen again. So with that, thank you for attending our special little episode today. Our next Gardening in the Panhandle Live is going to be on February the 9th, and it's going to be on small space vegetable gardening. One of my favorite topics, something all of us on this Gardening in the Panhandle Live do every year in our own garden. So I think y'all will really enjoy that. Again, join us on February 9th. And so we want to thank all of our panelists today, Mark and Beth. They did a great job. Thanks to everybody for attending. Thank you to our background folks, Sheila Dunning, Ashley Stone-Cipher, Carrie Stevenson, Danielle Williams. Couldn't do without Julie McConnell. She gets all of this going. Our folks on Facebook, we thank y'all for tuning in. And until February 9th, y'all enjoy the cold weather. Try to avoid gardening as much as possible. And we'll see you next
Put those pruners down.
Put the pruners down. Y'all have a good one. Thank you for attending.
Bye, y'all. Thanks, everyone.